The silence inside the old courthouse felt heavier than the rain pounding against the tall windows as my uncle stood before the judge with absolute confidence, telling everyone that I had wasted my life chasing imaginary dreams before returning only to steal the inheritance my late grandmother had worked so hard to build. I remained perfectly still despite every insulting word he spoke because I had spent too many years learning that the strongest response to false accusations was not anger but patience, especially when the truth was waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. My name is Claire Morgan, and at 43 years old I never imagined that the place where my family's future would be decided would also become the place where my own past was publicly questioned by the people who should have known me better than anyone else. Across the courtroom, my uncle Daniel Morgan wore the confident smile of a man who believed he had already won because his reputation in our small town had convinced nearly everyone that whatever he said must automatically be the truth. Daniel slowly walked toward the witness stand while holding a thick stack of documents that he treated like undeniable proof, confidently telling the court that I had disappeared nearly 20 years earlier, without leaving behind any evidence of meaningful employment or financial stability. According to his carefully rehearsed story, I had spent those years moving from one temporary job to another before suddenly returning after my grandmother's passing with the sole intention of claiming money that I had done absolutely nothing to earn. His lawyer adjusted his glasses before asking whether I could present a single company record, business license, employment certificate, or professional award that proved I had built a respectable career during the last 15 years. I calmly answered that some professions required complete privacy because public recognition could place innocent lives at risk. But my explanation only encouraged quiet laughter from several people seated inside the gallery who mistook confidentiality for an excuse instead of a responsibility. Sitting only a few feet away was my younger cousin Emily, whose eyes remained fixed on the floor while she pretended to carry the unbearable weight of caring for our grandmother alone during her final years. She never mentioned the mysterious financial assistance that had quietly covered expensive treatments, private nurses, prescription medications, and emergency hospital bills because every payment had arrived through charitable organizations that never revealed the identity of the person funding them. Daniel's attorney placed several bank statements on the evidence table and confidently claimed they proved that thousands of dollars had disappeared from my grandmother's personal account during the final months of her life, carefully implying that I had taken advantage of an elderly woman who could no longer protect herself. Every sentence was delivered with theatrical precision, and the audience listened in complete silence as if they were witnessing the final piece of a mystery that had already been solved. Emily slowly walked to the witness stand, wiping away tears that appeared almost too perfectly timed, before describing me as someone who rarely visited home yet somehow always seemed to know when money was available. She spoke about lonely holidays, unanswered phone calls, and whispered family disappointments, leaving out the countless evenings when I had watched over my grandmother through encrypted video calls arranged by medical specialists because my work prevented me from revealing where I truly was. When my attorney finally stood to question the witnesses, he did not interrupt their emotional performance or argue with their accusations, because he seemed strangely interested in allowing every exaggeration to become part of the official court record. He quietly asked only a few simple questions about dates, financial transfers, and signed authorizations, and every answer my uncle confidently provided seemed to strengthen a strategy that only my attorney fully understood. The judge carefully observed both sides without revealing his thoughts, occasionally making handwritten notes while studying every document presented before him with remarkable attention to detail. Although the spectators believed the hearing was moving steadily in Daniel's favor, I noticed the judge pausing several times whenever my uncle made broad claims that were unsupported by actual evidence rather than verified facts. My uncle eventually lost his patience and pointed directly at me, declaring that an honest person would have returned home years ago, instead of hiding behind mysterious excuses and secretive employment that nobody could verify. I met his angry stare without raising my voice and quietly replied that truth never becomes less valuable simply because it remains unseen. And sometimes the greatest acts of service are the ones history is never allowed to record. The quiet confidence in my answer seemed to unsettle the courtroom far more than any emotional outburst could have, because for the first time my uncle hesitated before speaking as though he had expected fear instead of composure. My attorney slowly rose from his seat and requested permission to introduce newly released financial records obtained through months of independent investigation, explaining that they would establish the complete history of every transaction connected to my grandmother's estate. As the thick folders were handed to the judge, the atmosphere inside the courtroom changed almost instantly, and the spectators who had been whispering moments earlier leaned forward in complete silence to watch what would happen next. The documents revealed that every payment questioned by the plaintiff had been legally authorized for specialized medical treatment, private nursing care, rehabilitation equipment, and emergency procedures that had given my grandmother precious additional years with the family she loved. Daniel immediately objected, insisting that complicated paperwork could easily be manipulated by someone determined to hide financial crimes. But his confident voice now carried unmistakable traces of uncertainty that everyone in the room could hear. Without showing the slightest frustration, my attorney informed the court that an independent forensic accountant and certified financial investigators had already examined every bank transfer, every receipt, and every legal authorization before preparing reports that completely contradicted the plaintiff's allegations. The forensic accountant entered the witness stand and carefully explained that the anonymous charitable trust responsible for reimbursing my grandmother's medical expenses had passed multiple government audits without a single violation being discovered. He then presented a detailed timeline proving that every reimbursement had been deposited before the corresponding medical bills were paid, making it impossible for any money to have been stolen from the estate as my uncle had repeatedly claimed throughout the trial. An uncomfortable silence settled over the courtroom as members of the audience slowly realized that the story they had accepted for months was beginning to fall apart piece by piece under the weight of verified evidence rather than emotional accusations. I remained quietly seated beside my attorney without celebrating the sudden change in momentum, because I knew the most important truth had not yet been revealed, and the next piece of evidence would completely transform the direction of the entire case. The following morning, my attorney requested permission to present one final witness whose testimony, he explained, would answer every remaining question about my professional life without violating the legal boundaries that protected confidential government operations. A distinguished woman in a navy suit entered the courtroom carrying a sealed portfolio, introduced herself as a senior federal legal advisor, and assured the judge that her appearance had been authorized solely to verify my employment history and nothing beyond that. After reviewing her official credentials, the judge granted permission for limited testimony, and the advisor calmly confirmed that I had been continuously employed by a federal agency for nearly 2 decades in a position requiring complete anonymity from public records. She explained that the absence of online profiles, business registrations, and conventional employment documents was not evidence of deception but a mandatory condition of my service, making every accusation based on my missing identity entirely misleading. Daniel's attorney attempted one final cross-examination, asking whether anyone could independently verify such extraordinary claims without relying on classified information that the court itself could not examine in full. The advisor responded by presenting certified government letters, signed under legal authority, confirming that every statement she had made had already been verified through secure judicial channels, leaving no reasonable basis to question the authenticity of my employment. A visible wave of uncertainty spread across the courtroom as the spectators who had confidently believed my uncle's version of events slowly realized that the mysterious gaps in my life had never been signs of failure but necessary sacrifices demanded by responsibilities I could never publicly discuss. Even Emily looked toward me with tears in her eyes, finally recognizing that the distance she had mistaken for indifference had actually been the price of a career built on protecting others rather than seeking recognition. The judge closed the confidential documents, removed his glasses, and looked directly at my uncle before stating that the court had now received overwhelming evidence proving that the lawsuit had been built almost entirely upon assumptions instead of verified facts. He announced that the hearing would move to final arguments, reminding both parties that truth is established through evidence rather than reputation, and the confidence that had once filled Daniel's face disappeared as he realized the outcome was no longer under his control. During the closing arguments, my attorney reminded the court that assumptions, rumors, and personal opinions could never replace verified evidence, no matter how often they were repeated or how respected the person making them appeared to be. He carefully summarized every document, financial record, and witness statement presented throughout the hearing, demonstrating that each accusation against me had collapsed when confronted with facts instead of speculation. Daniel's lawyer made one final attempt to persuade the judge by arguing that my years of secrecy had naturally created suspicion within the family. But even he struggled to defend claims that had already been disproven by independent investigators and official government confirmations. The confidence that had filled his voice at the beginning of the trial had completely disappeared, replaced by long pauses and uncertain explanations that convinced no one in the courtroom. After several moments of thoughtful silence, the judge returned with his written decision and announced that the lawsuit was dismissed in its entirety because the plaintiff had failed to present credible evidence supporting any allegation of theft, fraud, or financial misconduct. He further ordered Daniel to reimburse all legal expenses incurred during the proceedings, explaining that the court could not ignore the serious damage caused by reckless accusations that had been made without proper investigation. Daniel slowly lowered his head as the reality of the judgment settled over him, realizing that years spent shaping false stories about me had been undone by a single day of truthful evidence presented before an impartial court. Emily quietly approached me after the hearing, tears filling her eyes, as she admitted that she had believed everything she had been told for years and asked whether I could ever forgive the misunderstanding that had divided our family for so long. As I stepped outside the courthouse into the warm afternoon sunlight, I felt neither victory nor bitterness because the greatest reward was not winning the case but finally reclaiming my name and my dignity after years of silent sacrifice. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.